Hey everyone, welcome back to the Find Me Project and podcast. I'm your host, Mark DeLuca. Before we get into today's conversation, I want to give you a little context on where this one came from. This conversation was originally recorded for season 1 of Built to Perform, a show focused on endurance sports, athletic performance, and pushing past your limitations. Kirk McCarley is a 30-year executive leader, an ESPN talent statistician, and author, and somebody who's logged thousands of miles on a bike. On paper, it's a leadership and performance conversation. But the more Kirk and I talked, the more I realized this conversation didn't belong to just one show. It belongs here too. Because what Kirk shares, surviving a cardiac event that came out of nowhere, getting struck by a truck on a training ride, and then making the choice to call the man who hit him and forgive him, that's not just a performance story. That's a story about what happens to a person in the moment everything falls apart. And that's exactly the kind of conversation the families, friends, and communities of a missing person need to hear. At the Find Me Project, we sit with families at the hardest moments of their lives, moments with no clear resolution, no roadmap, and no guarantee of an answer. Kirk's story doesn't offer easy fixes. It offers something more honest. Proof that people come back from the moments that black out the world, that forgiveness can disarm even the most senseless collisions, and that when your turn comes to be the it person, the training and the faith carry you further than you think. As Kirk put it, closing out our conversation, God has placed you in this position for a reason. So whether you're here as part of our Guardian Angel Task Force, you're a family member still waiting for answers, or you just found us, I think you're going to get something out of this one. Here's my conversation with Kirk McCarley.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
So I think a good starting point, Kirk, is I'd like to give you a proper introduction, if you're okay with that.
I am a person of faith, husband, father, grandfather, executive and career coach, talent statistician with ESPN, group spinning instructor, author, and blessed.
Blessed indeed. And, you underplayed a lot of your background. So I want to, just kind of highlight a couple things in greater detail. When you say that you're a leader, you have roughly around 30 years of executive leadership experience, correct?
Correct.
Yeah, and that is just instrumental into our conversation today. Looking at your bio in preparation for our conversation, you're also a certified and accredited professional coach. Like you said, you work for ESPN, you're an author. I think most important, and this is one of my first questions for you here, but most important, you're a husband, married for 44 years. Is that right?
We'll add another couple to that now, and she will have put up with me now for 46 years.
That is incredible.
July 12th. Yeah.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I outkicked my coverage for sure. She is a tremendous gal, and we've had a lot of fun on this journey.
You have 2 children, you have 7 grandchildren, and as you said, you're a believer and follower of Jesus Christ. My first question for you, being married for that long, what would you say the secret is to a happy marriage?
We laugh a lot, and we have grown in commonality. We both have our own businesses now. Post when I was the primary breadwinner, now that role has probably shifted to her, and I've had to learn to acquiesce to the talent that she has. So she is the main provider, I would say now, although I draw income from fixed income retirement plans and Social Security and investments and things of that nature, and my business. But number one, laugh together, have commonality, and most importantly for us, a shared faith, which has grown and permeated through our years. Um, she has been a tremendous influence on me as far as my faith walk is concerned, because I've observed what her practices are, what she does, and she has caused me, and I hope she would say the same thing of me, to be a better version of myself.
That's well said. Thank you very much for sharing that. And I can relate to everything that you have just talked about. I've nowhere near the years that you have underneath you, but my wife and I have been married now for 15 years. And if I look back to where we started, we have changed so much, but you have to be able to adapt to that change. And, I was just in Charlotte, North Carolina for the past couple of days. And, I was talking to somebody over dinner and I asked them the same question, right? I think they had been married for 25 years, if I remember correctly, but they had said, you can't give 20%, you can't give 50%, right? Some people think, well, I'm going to do half the dishes and my wife's doing the other half because that's fair, right? They said, no, you got to go 100%, all in, both of you at all times. And I just think that's just, a really good way to look at marriage.
I'm a statistician, so I'm logical, I'm analytical, and I like to track numbers, obviously. And earlier in the relationship, I would commit the sin of keeping score. I did dishes tonight, you'll do dishes tomorrow night, as an example. Now it's more recognition of what is needed to fulfill this holistic relationship. So she is with a client, let's say, for instance, and she's going to be home late. What can I do to pick up the slack, even though it may not be my night to do that, or evening to do that assigned task? And she has done the same thing with me when I have late evenings or have other things that get in the way, accidents, things like that, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So we blend that without doing the yeah that we may have bickered with each other on years and years ago.
Yeah, sound advice. And, talking about faith and being a believer, I am very new to this. I wish I could say that I've had faith throughout my entire life. I think I have in some way or another, but, my wife for years has tried to encourage me to become a greater believer and follow Jesus. And I would just say, honestly, in the past 2 years, I've really gone all in. And, I read the Bible every day. I just started going to church. I became so curious. And I wish I would have had that before, but, living the lifestyle that I did, I think everything happens for a reason. But if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been a follower of Christ?
I was raised in the church as a little kid. So I was singing Jesus Loves Me at 4 or 5 years old. But that faith has matured along the way. It's changed, it's permeated. And I wish I could say that I start each day strongly in prayer, strongly in the Word. I do have a couple of devotionals that I go through. But what has worked in my case, as I've reached a more mature point in my faith, is being involved in having responsibility, having a job. For instance, I have a small group that I lead that is representative of the former church that we belonged to when we were in St. Louis. We continue to watch services remotely, my wife and I, because they're so inspiring. And so this is a little over 6 years ago, and we were watching remotely, and they, during the welcome, were talking about small groups, and I was intrigued with that, and so I emailed the church office following that service. How do I become a part of a small group? And the response back, I don't live in the community anymore. The response back was, would you be open to leading a small group? And I'm like, okay. And so all of a sudden, I was a small group leader. 3 weeks later, COVID struck, and every group went remote. I continued to do that. And how that's gotten me into the Word is by necessity. I have to prepare each time we meet for what we're going to be talking about, develop an outline. Coaching skills have certainly helped with that as well. My church down here that we are members of, I teach elementary school kids Sunday school. So I see God through the eyes of a child through them. And so those two activities in particular have kept me especially grounded, besides being a member of a small men's group.
Yeah, what you described is I like to refer to that as the "you're it" factor, right? And I want to actually circle back to that here in just a few minutes as our conversation will lead us there. But I've really been looking forward to this conversation, Kirk, because I think we're going to have some audience members who are leaders in their respective field of practice. They may be in the military, law enforcement, other first responder organizations. I think we're going to certainly have some athletes with the Built to Perform brand that we have that are going to listen to this. And, they're looking at how can I become the best version of myself? How can I be a top performer with everything that I do? But also the second half to that is I think there's going to be people listening to our conversation where maybe they're going through tremendous grief. Maybe they're going through tremendous hardship right now in their life where they feel like everything is falling apart, whether they're missing a loved one with some of the work that we do with the Find Me Project, or maybe they've just recently had a family member pass, or they lost a job, whatever it is. And I think your life experiences, your knowledge that, some of the things you're going to talk about, I think will provide them a lot of value. And that's actually where I'd like to start. You have gone through several very stressful, very impactful things that have happened to you in your life. Two of these specifically, you went through a cardiac medical event and a cycling accident. And just, from the little that I know about that and thinking about it, I think seeing where you are today, those two events have really shaped you. It kind of molded you into, maybe redefining your purpose and mission in life, or, how you look at certain things. But I'd like to start with the first one, with that major cardiac event. If you're open to it, could you maybe share what happened?
This has been about 12 years ago. And I mentioned earlier, I'm a group exercise instructor, spinning. So I like to say that I keep in fairly good shape, or I try to, so that I can continue to feed my high school appetite, which hasn't seemed to go away with age. So I was working out, wasn't teaching that day, but I was working out at the gym that I taught at, and I was doing lateral pull downs, Mark. The world went black. And the next thing I knew, I was overseen by an EMT or a paramedic. I had an oxygen mask on and was being asked the question, "What's your name? What's your date of birth?" And carried out as a stretcher as the rest of the gym members parted ways, and they were astonished. Doesn't this guy teach class? And I'm kind of like saying, God, this shouldn't happen to me. I take care of myself. I don't do things that other people my age are doing. I'm not overweight. I'm healthy. Nonetheless, I was carted to the hospital. Uh, my wife and I were living in different places at that time, not because of marital discord, but because I was finishing up a career in St. Louis, and she had already moved down here to Northwest Florida, where she was trying to establish her business now that we had an empty nest. So I contacted her and I said, well, bad news. I'm not going to be able to cover my game this weekend with ESPN because they're going to keep me hospitalized over the weekend and then run some tests on Monday to see what the cause of this fainting was. Come Monday, they did the dye test, and the cardiologist came back to report to me you've got a triple blockage, and we're going to need to do bypass surgery. And the surgeon who spoke to me said, tomorrow. And I said, mañana? He said, yes, sir. So I contacted my wife, who had adamantly said, don't take any action until you've gotten a second opinion. But I had a peace at that time that said, I need to take care of this and I don't want to deliberate it. And God, I'm going to put it in your hands. Your will be done. There was not a particular fear or being scared about the procedure I was going to go through, but it was more looking past that. Let's get this done. Let's move beyond that. So that was on a Monday. A Tuesday, I was filleted and came back in recovery and was doing remarkably well, I guess, because of the condition that I was in going into that. Began rehab pretty vigorously when I got home the next week. In fact, what I resented is the rehab nurses who were coming to visit me were all overweight. And I was already walking 2 miles around the neighborhood a week after post-op. And they said, don't do that. And I'm kind of like, you're telling me what to do? So I was kind of on my self-program of recovery, but I was missing work and also found myself slipping into a bit of a depression. And the Holy Spirit spoke to me at that point in time. And basically, I felt an empowerment. Get back to where you were, but not just that, get beyond where you were. So I was back at the gym 5 weeks post-op, and I was back teaching spinning classes 7 weeks after that, and back doing my slow cycling by the next year. This happened towards the end of that year. So very blessed, and now have a lot of empathy for others. And I see what God was doing in this empathy with others who maybe have genetics through kind of no fault of their own, suffer these kinds of things. And what do we do with that? So I'm a big advocate for cardio care. Can I eat better? Yes. But exercise and continual exercise has proven to be a gift to me.
Yeah. I appreciate you sharing that. And you are an overachiever in every way, right? I mean, with the heart attack and everything else, but I find that remarkable that you were back working out, walking 2 miles and, getting back after it, shortly after a significant, medical event like that. But, what I kind of want to hit on a little bit here is, so throughout this process, let's go back to the, when you woke up and you had EMTs surrounding you, did you start to talk to God at that very moment?
I think I was more in survival mode at that point in time. Where am I? What just happened? Why am I in this condition? Not why me, but why am I in this state right now? What's occurred? And it was probably later on the precipice of having surgery. And then at that point in time when I was slipping into depression, or thought I was, that I turned that over to God. God, what do you want me to do with this? And begin some honest and earnest conversations.
When you did that, when you turned it over to God, did you feel immediate release of stress, and did you feel more comfortable?
I felt empowered, I would say is the best word. Continue the rehab that you're doing, and that's kind of the Holy Spirit speaking to me. And continue to push yourself, because I'm competitive, to get back to where I think you can be and where I know you want to be.
Yeah, that's good. Good advice. I appreciate you sharing. And, I ask it because with some of the work we do, sometimes families will ask us that very question, how can I or should I talk to God through this horrific event of, their loved one disappearing, vanishing without a trace, or, maybe it's a different situation. And, I can always only kind of go back. I remember my time in the Marine Corps when I was overseas at war. I remember, there came a time where we had a lot of bad things happening, and I accepted death for the very first time. And I remember when I accepted death and kind of put that in God's wheelhouse, I felt so at peace and comfortable, and I wasn't tensed up anymore. And then even to this day, to be honest with you, Kirk, a lot of the stuff I do, I have this, two words that I tell myself all the time, whether it's in my professional or personal life, and it's God's plan. God's plan. When I stop trying to control every single small detail of my life, and I just remind myself God's plan, things seem to work out just a little bit better.
It's like on a song in Frozen, which I've got grandkids. Let it go, let it go, let it go.
I like that. I like that. I remember a time when my kids were younger. Gosh, but that would be playing all the time and could not get it out of my head. So I know what you're going through. All right. Well, let's talk about the second situation that happened. And I'm a cyclist. I've competed heavily, primarily in off-road events, off-road triathlons, primarily mountain biking. I've just recently this year have gotten into road cycling. I did my first big event. I have another one coming up that I'm training for next month, and I'm going all in on this. So this is my biggest fear, what we're about to talk about here. But you had a cycling accident that caused you to have significant injuries. I believe you had to be airlifted to a hospital. Can you walk us through that one?
Well, I'll predicate it by saying I'm going to go back out there later today. I've got my jersey on, so as soon as we're done, it's hitting the road with the bike. I probably ride 2,000, 2,500 miles a year on a bike. Teach spinning classes, add another 2,000, 2,500 miles on that. And to keep myself motivated, I'll participate in group tours. Not in your category of competing. Competition for me is finishing, so my speed is pretty sedentary compared to a competitive peloton cyclist. But nonetheless, preparatory ride to. I had an event the following week after this incident happened, which I had to cancel, and then the bike ride across Georgia, which I do annually. I was going to do a metric century that day, 100 kilometers, and I had probably about 4 to go. Signaled left turn and was about to turn and it looked clear behind me, but I was struck and I was surprised. That's the last thing I remember. Apparently, about 30, 45 minutes passed by, and come to find out later on, I was ambulanced to an area to where helicopters could come in and airlift me. And the first thing I recall, oddly enough, much like the gym incident, is what's your name and date of birth. And I repeated that. Okay, he's conscious, he can talk. And this was my first helicopter ride. And the first thing I was fearful of, it had been a breezy day that day, is this because this is going to be a bumpy ride. I'm not looking forward to that, but it was quite smooth as it turned out, and airlifted me to a trauma 2 center where I was diagnosed with 5 broken ribs, a concussion, obviously, took 16 stitches up here, separated shoulder, which is still bumping up, and a partially torn rotator cuff. I was in good spirits other than that, Mark, and never remember a time of fear or uncertainty. They probably had me drugged up with something that helped that a little bit. But one of the first things I did when I got there, I was uncomfortable, I was hurting, was contacting my wife. And I said, well, I'm not in a place you expected me to be. And she said I wasn't fully lucid and repeated myself quite a bit. I don't recall that. But it was reassuring to her to hear my voice and that my spirits were positive. And during the course of the 3 days that I spent in 2 days in ICU and one in a regular room at the hospital. Had a number of people that dropped in, apparently slept quite a bit during that period of time, and it passed rather quickly. That was on a Tuesday, and I was discharged on a Friday. And the comments were I was doing remarkably well, likely attributed to the fact that I keep myself in halfway decent shape.
Again, I appreciate you sharing, and you certainly, that's one way to get to VIP private helicopter tour, right? It's, again, though, that is one of my biggest fears. And I don't, when I say fear, it's not, that fear will never keep me from cycling. As a matter of fact, just like you, I thought this morning, I said, I cannot wait to get out and cycle. So I have a training session later today as well. But when I'm out riding, especially when I'm trying to get from one point to another and I'm out on the main road, cars just, they do not move over enough, and it causes a lot of stress. So again, I appreciate you sharing that, Kirk. I think, as I mentioned, anybody going through a challenging time right now may be able to take some of what you said and apply it to their situation.
One other thing I might add to the story, and it is a tremendous learning experience, or has been for me, with regard to the power of the Holy Spirit. That was on a Tuesday. On a Thursday, and why I say it's God at work is because this is totally out of character for me. But there was a prompt, and I'd seen the police report of what had happened. The prompt was to contact the driver of the truck who struck me. I did that. He was surprised. I could hear in his voice when I made that phone call. I said, I'm the guy you hit, and told him my name. And he was really struggling with that. I had an opportunity to hear his story a little bit. He's a 30-year veteran. He's local in the area. He saw the left turn signal, but somehow in his mind, he reinvented that to be a come ahead, which he tried to do. So there was a divine, I'm convinced, intervention that took place to where the two of us were supposed to connect. God brings people together in strange ways, and this is another one of those. He suffered a little bit of PTSD as a result of that and had difficulty for a while. But he said the fact that when he was apologizing and I said it was an accident, and then I went on to say, and I forgive you totally for what happened, these things happen, was such a relief for both him and his wife. We have since communicated. We've gone to lunch. I've heard his story. He's a military veteran, 30 years. He has seen action frontline in some pretty unstable environments. He is on the threshold of retiring from that, but really a nice fella. And to kind of wrap this whole story up, later this evening, we're having him and his wife for supper.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's incredible. It's, again, the only two words I can go back to is God's plan, right? There's no other explanation. I mean, when you look at those two events, especially the cycling accident, you two coming together like that, you reaching out and having the courage. And I mean, not only you, I mean, obviously you're here today, and I mean, I'm sitting here in studio talking about God, which if we would have gone back 2 years ago, I would, if you would have told me that I'd be doing this, I'd say you're crazy. But not only you, think of how many people he's reached and he's changed by you two meeting and the story that you just shared.
And what's remarkable, Mark, it is not me at all. It's the power of God and the Holy Spirit who used me as a conduit to get his word out. And it is just the power of forgiveness to not only the person who is forgiven, but the forgive her, me, was such a release of tension and has really been a seminal moment. That's been over 11 weeks ago now in my life, that I've spoken to God and say, Lord, okay, you've given me another second chance. What do you want me to do with this one?
That's powerful. I mean, it really is, Kirk. And, I've had a few people in my past that I've looked up to, tell me, hey, you should share your story, right? Much of my life has been kind of in the shadows and I have just never talked about it openly. But I've had people tell me that I should. And I would almost encourage you, just like you're sharing this with all of our listeners, to maybe you two come together and imagine you being on a stage talking about this, sharing it with other people who are experiencing. Imagine a mom in the crowd where her son was killed, murdered, and she's struggling with the idea of, do I forgive the person who did that? Or do I hold them accountable? And do I view them as evil for the rest of my life? And, she's struggling with that thought. And, they arrive to where you're talking and they hear your word, and imagine how much it would change their life. That would be amazing.
It's changed both of ours, and he raises chickens. He's giving us free eggs.
There it is. God's plan.
That's right.
So, let me go back. Let's switch gears here for a second. I'd like to go back to your 30 years of executive leadership. When you think about where you started throughout that entire journey, would you mind maybe just giving us the high level overviews on where you started and where it took you to the point where you left that world?
Coming out of school, I found a job walking door to door in a community in which I did not live because I wanted to establish myself. So I found a company that took a chance on a management trainee, brought that person in, assigned him to various responsibilities throughout this organization. But I landed in the personnel office. And as I would report on my experiences, one of the most positive ones was time spent there. I really like this. I really enjoy this. As it turned out, the personnel manager was terminated not too long after that. And so at 23 years old, they placed me in his stead. I had no idea what I was doing, Mark. It was trial by fire, by baptism, and we had some pretty ugly industrial accidents that occurred. One was a death that is forever marked on me, singed on me, bad choice of words maybe, but it was due to a fire, and I'll never get that out of my head for as long as I live. A real advocate of fire safety as a result of that. So I did a little bit of time there, was ready to progress in my career because it was obvious it wasn't going to happen there. So took another job in industry, followed by another one that got me into local government, where I spent 31 years as a human resources director, did some deviations along the way. My evolution in that job, obviously, it was learning to begin with, very policy driven, learning the mechanics of the job, and it was somewhat mechanical, and had to get in an environment where I had to reapply and learn some of the human aspects of that. How to listen well to people, how to ask good questions, how to fulfill the mission of the organization. So, gaining that proverbial seat at the table. As that career matured, particularly at the latter stages of it, I was out of policy development, somewhat out of recruiting by that point in time, benefit administrations, the fundamental components of an HR career. And it was more and more people coming to me, lost, if you will, frustrated. What do I do with my career? I need some advice. So I was moving into a counselor's role to some degree, sage, I guess, as far as my experience and what I'd gone through in organizations that I'd served along the way. When I reached that point of, I think over this 30 some odd years, I've done about everything I can do. I hired a coach myself and was considering several different vocations to pursue. Teaching, I thought about therapy because I had some rough points in my life prior to the accidents that I really benefited from a counselor therapeutic help. I thought about faith-based ministry. But it was about the third meeting with that individual said, I want to do what you do. I want to become a coach. And so that launched that. And that's been about 13 years ago now.
Wow. How did you know? Um, this is something that I struggle with quite a bit, and I think a lot of other folks do. I'm a practitioner today, right? My day-to-day job, I'm an engineer. I guess you could also call me a data analyst, data scientist. So you and I have a similar background there. But how did you know that it was time for you to go from a practitioner to become a leader?
I had a performance evaluation from, it was about the third job I had from my boss. And it was positive for the most part, but there was one phrase that was included in that said, you tend to be rigid. And that really stung because I am an Enneagram 5, logical, analytical. If listeners are acquainted with that, that's where I sit, and so hardcore in that I don't have any wings that come off of it. But I'd become a prisoner somewhat to policy, to black and white, and realized it was time to learn some of these gray areas. And what do I need to do in order to do that? So I became more conscious of observing people, watching, seeing how they were effective, how they read other people, what were the characteristics they took on, and so really refining soft skills. And I've been a student of that ever since that moment in time.
Now, going back, early on, we spoke about the you're it factor, where you found yourself in that moment where you were the it person and, you took charge. If, our listeners, if you haven't experienced this to the point in your life where something happens, whether it's in your personal or professional life, something happens where everybody turns to you and you're now that it person and you have to lead through it. There's really only two options. You're either going to rise to the occasion and excel, or you're going to crash and you're going to fail. And I think a lot of that goes, back to preparation, mindset. One of the things that I always tell folks is in times of crisis or disaster, you're going to default to your most basic level of training, and you need to become a master of the basics. But when we think about the you're it factor, right? Again, we have a lot of leaders that are probably listening to our conversation right now. When it's their turn to become the it person, based on your experience, your background, what would be some of the top advice points that you would give that person so when it's their time, they're successful?
Again, going back to faith, God has placed you in this position for a reason, because he believes that this is where you're needed right now. Maybe because of your skill. Maybe it's because, unfortunately, you need a little further education. We're going to take you to the School of Hard Knocks, and you're going to learn this in a difficult way. Kerrville, Texas was one of the communities I worked in. And those that will recall last summer, it was 4th of July, there was a horrible flood that took place down there, and a number of campers lost their lives as a result of that. And of course, there's enough criticisms to go around to everyone. But the fact of the matter is, one of the camps, Camp Mystic, I just learned recently, is going to have to file for bankruptcy. That incident took me back 40 years, to when the fire chief of Kerrville, Texas said, I need to complete the annex for our emergency management plan. I need a public information officer. We knew each other. Can I put you down? You'll really never have to do anything with this. Sure. And my thinking at the time, I'm a young guy, it's going to look good on the resume. This is July 17th, 1987. I get a call at 4 in the morning. The river has come out of its banks, and there are campers that were trapped in a bus. We don't know what their state is right now, but we feel that about 30 people may be in that river trying to hang on to trees for dear life. Public information officer was needed because we had media from not just that area, but the Associated Press, CNN. And guess what? I was the person that was on camera to respond to that. Once again, I had no idea what I was doing, Mark. But even at that young age, just a certain something from my gut came to mind to speak to what the questions were and to harness those that were there with the media who had helicopters. Would you guys, after we're done with the interview, help us see if you can locate anybody that's down there? It was all hands on deck. And what I was most impressed with at that time, one, the chaos that took place, but it was organized chaos. All the people that were on scene there, particularly our firefighters, protective service people, almost instinctively knew what to do, from police officers trying to control traffic to swiftwater rescue personnel who were in these life rafts in the treacherous waters of the Guadalupe River trying to retrieve people. And the helicopters and emergency management personnel were successful in saving quite a few lives. Unfortunately, there were some that were lost as well, but it was an impressive thing to behold and really opened up my eyes to, when you're in that moment, trust yourself, trust God, trust your instincts.
Yeah. That's incredible advice, and, a very good story to share. Again, thank you. One of the final questions I want to ask. So this is a question that I was actually generated from our community, our audience. One of the things we like to do is whenever we have a guest such as yourself join us, we like to perform some outreach and see if they have any questions that they want to ask. So this was a common thread that we saw across the board, and we kind of simplified it a little bit here. But what is the number one thing that you see holding most high performers back?
It's a 5-letter word, and I hear it over and over again. I'm stuck. It takes me back to, I alluded to having some clinical depression at one point in time. This was when I was in my 30 years ago, and I'm in my 30s, and I was in a small group. One of the members of the group knew of my struggles and said to me, I know this guy that everyone who has encountered him has responded. He has said something that's made a tremendous difference. I'd like you to see him and I'll pay for it. Okay. So I'm talking to this fella, and he's asking me, where are you right now? And I said, I feel like I'm in the wilderness. I'm stuck. I'm also relying on God like I've never relied on him in any time in my life. And all he said to me was, then God has you exactly where he wants you. Now, I'd like to say life changed for me immediately at that point in time. It didn't, but the number of times I've gone back to that interaction, that intersection at critical points in my life has been worth more than all the gold in the world. So, for those of us who are stuck, move. 4-letter word. It was my word of the year for 2025. What does that mean? It means for some people, just getting out of bed in the morning can be difficult. Take one step at a time. The elephants are big. One bite at a time, to put it into bite-sized chunks that are manageable. Gain some momentum through that movement, and then go to the word of the year for me this year, which is connect. Network, reach out for others. You may be doing more good for them through your outreach than they are doing for you. And guess what? After you've done these kinds of things, executive, you've got some momentum going. You can measure what you've done to to create impact, which is what so many people are looking for.
You know, I could not think of a better way to end our conversation here today. Kirk, I just want to say thank you. This has been amazing. If we have anyone that is listening that wants to find out more about what you have going on, where can we direct them?
Mark, I've got a couple of websites. My coaching website is theseedsowercoach.com. I've also got an author's website, kirkmccarleyauthor.com, if you'd like to pick up a copy of my book, Thoughts for My Kids and Other People's Kids. I'm on social media. You can find me on Instagram, on LinkedIn, on Facebook. And if you're ever down here in Northwest Florida on the lovely Emerald Coast, you can probably find me down here, either at my house, teaching a spin class, or riding my bike somewhere.